White men go to the army to become men. Black men go to the bush to become men. We go to prison to become men.
At just 17, Welcome faced a 23-year sentence in one of the deadliest prisons in the world.
I had to make a choice. Do I want to remain a soldier, or do I want to climb this ladder?
He had no idea what he would have to sacrifice, and that the rules of prison gangs were completely different to what he was used to on the streets.
I joined the gangs when I was 12 years old, and predominantly the reason why I actually joined the gang, an absent father. Another reason why I joined the gangs was also because I was bullied and teased a lot. My community always saw education as the white man's tool to oppress and to further, degenerate. Wearing that blazer and having all of these emblems on my blazer was a kind of mommy's boy. They used to tease me by calling me a morphe. They used to call me a faggot. They said all of those things, and it made me feel somehow. I did not feel like I belonged anywhere because of being teased like that. So for me, it was the teasing part that made me feel like I wanted to belong somewhere. So when the opportunity came about to join the gangs, I happily jumped at it. And I felt like by joining the gangs, I would be able to eradicate all of this misunderstanding about who I truly was, because I did believe that I was a man. I did believe that I was strong enough to do whatever other men and other boys were doing. I didn't want my education, where I was coming from, to dictate my journey. When I joined the gangs at that age, it was predominantly stealing, taking from people what didn't belong to me, doing mischief. But the real reason why I felt like I was recruited was to be a drug runner, take packages to certain places. I remember being given those responsibilities and says, take this to this address. Don't change your uniform, wear it, because that time police would not search school-going boys. So we could empty our bags and put the drugs in there and then walk to wherever we needed to walk to and deliver these parcels. At that point, it was just a drug runner and delivering illegal things to people. Interestingly to note, my gang initiation only took place once I reached the age of 16. I initially thought that I was already part of the gang because I had been doing things with them, only to realize at the end of the day that it was just understanding how the gangs worked. I remember being called and said, now is the time for you to be a man and to really be part of the gangs. And I remember them joking about it and saying that you do know that white men go to the army to become men. Black men go to the bush to become men. We go to prison to become men. And they were laughing about it. At this moment, they said to me that I need to be initiated to become part of the gang. And I remember that evening, as it was yesterday, standing in that circle, surrounded by all these older men, and being handed this cotton cloth, opening it up, and then seeing firearm for the first time, and it had bullets with it. And I remember the guy telling me that this is your license, this is what's going to make you part of this big family, and the only way for you to truly be accepted into this gang is that if you use this to take a life. When I was handed this, I had two feelings, and then contrary to popular belief, there was the excitement of being recognized as a man, but there was also a fear of myself not knowing how this weapon works, but understanding in the back of my head that this weapon can actually take a life. I was scared about that. I questioned myself because I was a straight-A student. I grew up in a Christian background, so I knew what was right and what was wrong. And everything about holding this firearm in my hand was wrong. But there was a part of me that felt like I needed to do it so that these men can see me. Hurt people hurt people. I felt I wanted to be heard. And I felt like taking this firearm and actually taking a life would be my way of being heard and being seen and being respected, which was weird at the time, even though I was afraid and dead scared of the consequences. My first day in prison, was I couldn't believe, number one, that I was in prison. I felt like I was in a bad dream. I remember going into prison the first time after being processed, and I was standing in front, and these two men came. There was another boy standing next to me. I was 17 years old that time when I was sentenced, and I was sentenced to 23 years. And this guy was standing next to me, and they came to me first and asked me, who am I in prison? And I was like, welcome, because that's my name. And the guy slapped me. And he looked at me and he says, who are you in prison? And I said, welcome. And he slapped me again. I clearly thought to myself that I'm not welcome here. So there was this guy next to me, and they asked him, who are you in prison? And he proceeded to say, Frans van Jonalang. And nothing happened to him. So I thought that if he says that and nothing happened to him, let me say the same. So they asked me again, who are you in prison? And I said, Frans van Jonalang. Not realizing that I was actually telling them that I am willing to become a gang member of the 28s. Then after which these other two men then came, happily took me from the front to the back of the room, and they were like, we're happy that you chose us. When I looked at this guy's face, I was filled with fear because I literally did not know what was going to happen next. I did not understand prison. I thought that my credibility as a street gangster would give me some credibility inside prison, only to realize that the street gangs and numbers gang do not work the same. I had to start all over again. I had to reinvent myself all over again. I had to forget everything and everyone that I was and become a totally different person, and that was scary. Being in prison for the first night, hearing men scream, hearing what is happening to them while you are laying there thinking that you hope that this is not going to happen to you. And then the next morning a guy comes to you and says, because you chose us, you are protected. You won't be raped. You won't be hurt. No one can touch you because you are one of us. And for me, that gave me some kind of relief. But I also often wondered what it meant being one of them. I was sentenced to Paulsmoor prison, which was one of the 5 most deadliest prisons in the world. And being there was like, it's a prison that has to predominantly house 2,500 to 3,000 men. But this prison was 300% overpopulated. So in a room that was supposed to have 60, we had close to 180 men sleeping in it. We had to, there's all the things that I had to contend with. I know that there should be some hardships that you need to face because you've made disastrous choices. You've literally destroyed other people's lives. You've killed people. But the conditions in prison were not nice. This is not your mother's house. Imagine being cornered or in a room with 120 men, not having a fridge, not having a television, not having a kitchen, being woken up at 6 o'clock every single morning, being counted, then having breakfast. And the breakfast that you're having is not the breakfast of your choice. You can't ask for more sugar. You can't ask for more porridge. Everything is rationed. And then you get 1 hour exercise, and then after that, you're back in a cell for 23 hours every single day of your life. Looking out of the window, which is so small, you just see concrete, no grass, no trees, no birds, nothing. You tend to think that you are in a place that actually makes your emotion less human and more animalistic. You get into stupid fights. A man bumps into you because the space is so congested. You start fighting for unnecessary reasons. You start stabbing each other. And also the gang initiations that were happening. When we talk about rituals, you know, waking up early in the morning, having to stand in a queue because it's a gang-infested process. You have to tell another man how your night was, what you experienced, what you encountered, and how your day is going to be. It's like a check-in every single morning, like clockwork. Never miss it by a beat. And that was the ritual. That was having to check in, having to say how you are, having to say where you are at, having to say what you're going to do. And not just for yourself, but what you're going to do for the number. And growing yourself in that. I remember because I had chosen to become a 28, I had to get lessons on what it meant to be a 28. I had to learn the history being put into the corner, having my teacher sitting with me, teaching me day in and day out about the history of where the number comes from and why it exists. It was like a political process. It was like a military structure until I had to make a very, very important choice. Do I want to remain a soldier, or do I want to climb this ladder to become a leader of the gangs? As a soldier, it was very minimal tasks that I had, making sure that the cell was clean, follows orders. You know, you don't want to wake up every single morning having to clean, having to do things that you otherwise don't have to do if you were in a position of leadership. And I think for me, that's when the actual call for leadership came, is when a guy said to me, you will be cleaning after other men for 23 years. You need to make a conscious decision. And I asked him, so what is it that I need to do in order to step up and become a leader? You need to show no fear. You need to show strong leadership skills. And the only way for you to do that is to stab a correctional officer. I think the day for me when I chose to become a gang leader was the day when my life as Welcome, my name, ended. When you come into prison for the first time, there's an exchange that happens at the reception when you go into your cell. You hand over your ID, you hand over everything that is you, your clothes, your shoes, and you are given prison clothes, you're given prison shoes. Your identity is changed. You're no longer Welcome. You are now a number. The prison gave me a number and I can still remember my number. It is 20160311. But never were you called by your name, but by that number. If you had a visit, it would say 20160311 visit. Everything, everywhere that you went, if it was to go to the doctor, to go do your checkup, to go and get your clothes, to go and get your meal, it was just a number. So you literally lose sight of your name. So as I stepped up and said, I want to be much more than just a soldier, they said, you need to be sure of this decision, because the minute we hand you this knife and you go and stab this correctional officer, your name will be taken and you will no longer be known as Welcome, but you'll be called Nongoloza. And I needed to establish myself, and it's that moment that I decided to say yes to taking the life of a correctional officer. In a place like Pollsmoor, is number one, there's always danger. The benefits is that you no longer have to do what other people are asking you to do. You are your own boss. You can decide what you want to do, go where you want to go, establish yourself the way you want to establish yourself. So for me, the benefits were how well I could run the prison itself, because predominantly the prison is a cashless society. There's no money. But if you do wheel and deal either in prostitution or drugs or whatever else there is in prison, there's money attached to that. So you do get monetary incentives. So information comes at a cost. Anything another prisoner wants comes at a cost. And predominantly the 26s would be the ones that would sell. And as a 28 being in charge of all of this, I would then tax the 26 on whatever they sell. 75% of everything that you sell comes back to me. And that was my monetary value. I used to make 500,000 Rand a month while in prison through prostitution, through drug dealing, through solicitation of information. The benefits were also that sometimes there were difficult cases that the police outside could not break. And what we would do is that we would negotiate and say, we will break the guy for you, and in return, you will pay us a certain fee. Attorneys would come to us and say, I'm trying to break this case, and I'm trying to find a conviction on this gentleman, but he's not telling us the truth. We would say, for a certain fee, we would get you the information that you need in relation to this. So it was all of those types of wheeling and dealing. The politics of prison was dark and it was deep. Prostitution in prison was the order of the day, and it became a market. If white boys were coming into prison, they would cost more than colored boys. If Indian boys would come into prison, they would cost more. Drugs was the other thing that was quite lucrative, because a bankie of dacha, which is marijuana, would cost you like 80 Rand on the outside, but in prison it was 1,000 Rand. And you would make a killing if you were able to bring it in. And the only reason why it was easier to bring them in is because the 28s predominantly work in the kitchen. And the kitchen was the doorway from the outside into prison. And the 26s would normally be in the corridors. The 27s would be the ones upholding the law, because that's their job, to make sure that everybody understands the rules and the regulations that were put. There are supply and demand. So if there's a demand, if you want a scissors, they would get you a scissors, but at a cost. And from that cost that they give you, they can sell whatever they want to sell as long as the 75% goes back to the 28s. While being in prison and commanding 2,500 men, they choose you because they know that you're strategic. And being able to manage or to command 2,500 men to do exactly what you want them to do takes a lot of skill. The best thing that helped me do that was my ability to understand languages and to learn languages. Being able to communicate, being able to articulate myself in such a way that both the prison warders can understand, plus the gang that I was leading, for me to be understood by them, was a skill. Effective communication is just as much as important as it is in corporates. The only difference between the leading a gang in prison and leading a company as a CEO outside is the deadline. In a corporate outside, a deadline can be pushed back. But in prison, if people fail to deliver, a deadline is a deadline. They literally die for not delivering on time. It's toxic as hell to be a leader in prison. Of the 14 years, I stepped up to become a general with 28s for 7, and that is how I got my first star on my shoulder. And I went on, because every star on my shoulder represented a life that I had taken. At the age of 25, I was the youngest ever first-star general to have 4 stars on both my shoulders. Prison actually saved my life. If it wasn't for me going to prison, I would not have become the man that I am today.